Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Heather and it's been a rough month. The beginning of the month was really busy, and then of course the end of the month was a really hard end of the month. Not only is it gearing up to be the end of the school year, but as a teacher, with that latest news item that happened in America, although it was very far away from me, it was all too real and set off a lot of emotions. So what better way than to enjoy this beautiful, almost summer day and talk to you about some of the books that I have acquired this past spring. As I said, the beginning of the month was very busy. I had 4 consecutive weekends in New York City, seeing a variety of shows, and it was wonderful. But of course, I had to stop in bookstores. And it is also the beginning of book sale season, and Marissa of Blatantly Bookish and I went to a book sale down by her, and I got a ton more books. So I am really excited about all of these books. So let's bring up all of our moods by talking about exciting new reads. So first of all, I bought a couple of books off of the website Pango Books, mainly because my roommate Ellie was selling a lot of her unhauled books. I should point out she is my former roommate. I was not purchasing them from someone I currently live with. And I will link her store down below so you can check out the other books that she still has for sale, because she is a lovely human and has very good taste. But the book that I wanted to purchase from her was King of Crows by Libba Bray. I started the Diviners series a couple of summers ago, and I read book 2 in the summer of 2020, but I have been on the lookout for books 3 and 4 ever since, and I have not managed to find them until I saw that Ellie was selling this book. So I bought it from her to both support her and to help me finish the series. But of course this is book 4, so I also needed to purchase book 3 before the Devil Breaks You from another seller on Pango Books. The Diviners series, if you're unfamiliar with it, is a paranormal mystery slash horror slash adventure series that takes place in New York City in the 1920s. And it's about a group of friends, mainly about one particular young woman who discovers that she is a diviner. If she holds an object that belonged to someone, she can feel what they felt and see what they saw. And every single time in New York, various supernatural evil goings-on begin, and it's up to her and her group of friends to try and stop them. They are a really good series. I might wait until I am fully on summer break to read them because they can get very scary at times. So not books to read while you are stressed, but while you are feeling good, and if you are in the mood for a really gripping adventure, these are fantastic books. And while on Pango Books, I found 3 Susana Kearsley books for a grand total of $3. So of course I had to get those as well. If you have been following me this year, you will know that I love Susana Kearsley. My friend Amanda got me hooked on her books. So I found 3 more that I am excited to read. The first is Bellwether, which I know nothing about. Apparently there's forbidden love between a French-Canadian lieutenant and the daughter of the house where he is forcibly billeted. I had read somewhere else that this might take place on Long Island, which is really exciting because that is very close to where I live, and a lot of my family lives on Long Island, so I'm very familiar with it. So if that is true, I am really looking forward to this. The next one is A Desperate Fortune, which is about a woman who is researching this woman named Mary, who was a Jacobite, meaning that she supported the Stuart kings in rebellion against the Hanover kings. And through her research, the 2 women grow closer, and I'm assuming parallels spring up between both of their lives. Susana Kearsley's books can be somewhat formulaic, but in a very comforting way. So I'm really looking forward to this one. And then finally I found Named of the Dragon, which mainly takes place in Wales, I believe. And it is about a woman who goes on vacation to South Wales trying to deal with her grief over the loss of her child. But of course she ends up being involved in some sort of prophecy, and there are Celtic myths involved. It sounds very strange, but also really, really good. So I'm really excited to read this one as well. Then I ordered 3 books outright from the internet because I just couldn't wait. And the first one was My Policeman by Bethan Roberts. And this one I am excited to read, and I rationalized it by saying that since Harry Styles is going to star in the film adaptation, all of my students are going to be reading this and seeing it and talking about it, so it behooves me to know what they're talking about. However, I had to order this cover, which is the UK cover, because I much prefer it to the US cover. And this is about 3 people, mainly about a young woman who falls in love with a young man. However, her young man then falls in love with another young man who is also a policeman. So her engagement and then marriage to this man kind of covers their other relationship, and it's how the 3 of them navigate all of their relationships. I believe it takes place in the 1950s when homosexuality was still illegal in the UK. It does sound quite tragic, but I've also heard fantastic things. So once again, I'm excited to read this one as well. Then I also ordered The Emperor's Babe by Bernardine Evaristo, as I cannot get hold of this in any format in the US. And it sounds really intriguing. It's Bernardine Evaristo looking at what life would have been like in Roman Britain for a Black woman who is taken as a slave to the emperor. That sounds incredible. I need to read this, along with Mr. Loverman, but that I can get through my library at least. And finally, a book I ordered ages ago finally came in, and that is Make, Sew, and Mend by Bernadette Banner. I love watching Bernadette's videos about historical sewing and costume making, and so I'm really excited to have this book full of her tips about how to make historical garments, but also how to mend your current garments best so that they last longer. Because I have a few mending projects just over there in my room as well, so I would love her advice on how to do it well. Then there are all of the books that I got from my New York adventures. The first time I went in, I found 3 books. I'm calling these my Music Man books, because it's from when I went to see the Music Man. The first one is The Christie Affair by Nina de Gramont, which everyone has been talking about on BookTube. If you are one of those few people who probably have not heard of this yet, it is the story of the, I believe, 11 days when Agatha Christie went missing, as told from the perspective of her husband's mistress. It sounds incredible. I need to read this, and a lot of other booktubers that I love and trust have said that they liked it very much, so I'm excited. Then I also found a copy of The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas, which has been on my bucket read list for years and years and years. And I have finally found an unabridged edition. It's the Oxford edition, so I trust them. And you will actually see this again quite soon, because Naomi of Naomi's Bookshelf is going to be doing a read-along of it over the next couple of months. Plus, I want to read it sooner rather than later, because my lovely coworker Heidi teaches a much, much simplified and abridged version with her higher level French classes. And she kept wanting to tell me about all of the lessons that she was doing with that version of the novel. But she couldn't tell me what those lessons involved without giving away major plot points to The Count of Monte Cristo. So once I have read this, I can then go to Heidi and say, okay, tell me about all of your lesson ideas so that I can use them with any novels that I teach in the future. As far as I remember, because there was a Wishbone episode of this is about, what is his name? Edmond Dantes, who is framed and wrongfully imprisoned, manages to escape years later and somehow exact his revenge on those who framed him. And everyone who has managed to read it absolutely loves it, so I'm really excited to conquer the Count of Monte Cristo. And finally, I picked up Great Circle by Maggie Shipstead, which was at least on the long list for the Women's Prize. I don't know if it made it onto the short list. But at the time, I was hearing really great things about it, and it does sound really interesting. It is about a, I believe, fictional female pilot from the early 1900s who made it her mission to fly over the North and South poles and thus circumnavigate the globe. And then it is also about the actress who is asked to play her in a modern film version of her life, and what they learn about themselves and how their lives intersect. It sounds really interesting, and it's American historical fiction, which I don't usually enjoy, by which I mean it takes place in America. So I'm intrigued. Then the next weekend I went back into New York to see Cyrano with James McAvoy in Brooklyn, which was incredible, and I also discovered an incredible new bookstore in Brooklyn. Everyone goes to Books Are Magic, but Books Are Magic was a bit too far away from where we needed to be, but instead we came out of the subway and discovered the Center for Fiction, which is on Lafayette Street in Brooklyn. And it was truly wonderful, and I found 3 incredible books there. The first is The Secret Lives of Church Ladies by Disha Philyaw, which I've been hearing nothing but wonderful things about. It is a collection of short stories, I believe, about various women who were raised in the church and their journeys of self-discovery, their disillusionment with the church for a variety of reasons. And as someone who was raised in church myself and hopes to go back there one day, I'm really intrigued to see what these stories are about, because I have heard nothing but wonderful things from the people who have read it. I also found a copy of In Love and Trouble by Alice Walker, which I have been looking for ages, which is another short story collection from Alice Walker. And I loved the color purple, and I am really excited to find out that she did in fact write more than just the color purple. So I hope I love these stories just as much. And then finally, this book was on sale. It is The Lamplighters by Emma Stonex, which I have also been hearing wonderful things about this year. And this, I believe, is based on a true story of various lamplighters and lighthouse keepers who went missing. And then in the modern day, a family who has moved into the lighthouse, I think, is trying to figure out what happened to these people who went missing. And it sounds really, really cool. I must say I don't love this cover as much as the UK cover, but I'm still really excited to read it nonetheless. And then we come to the book sale books, of which there are many. First up, I found this beautiful old edition of The Pickwick Papers by Charles Dickens, which I haven't actually read. If I'm feeling brave, I might read it from this edition because it is actually holding together quite nicely. But if not, then my mother also has a more modern copy, which I could also read. I also found an English edition of Captain a la Triste by Arturo Pérez Reverte, and his daughter also helped him write this one. I don't know why she doesn't get credit on the English editions, but she does get credit on the Spanish editions. Apologies if you can hear my neighbor's lawn service kicking into effect. But if you were around last summer, you will remember that I wanted to read more in Spanish, and I remembered reading this novel in AP Spanish once upon a time, but only getting halfway through. So I started to read it, and it was a struggle last year. And I think it's because this takes place in the 1600s in Spain. And thus, a lot of the vocabulary that they are using are for things that people no longer use. I don't have to talk about those items on a daily basis. So I don't know what the word for lantern or farrier is, because I don't have to use them. So when I found this edition, I decided, you know what, maybe I should read this in English first, and then go back and try and read it in Spanish, so I'm not just flummoxed by the vocabulary. But if you were not around then, Captain Aletriste is a series about Captain Aletriste, who is a soldier returned from Spain's war with Flanders in the 1600s, and he becomes a mercenary and is hired to kill a certain young man, and things go on from there. The young man turns out to be the one-day Charles II of England, and this is all told from his squire's perspective, or page, I don't know, a young boy who follows him and helps him. And I remembered really enjoying it at the time. I was relatively enjoying it in Spanish, so I'm really hoping that I enjoy it and can get through it much more quickly in English. I also picked up Year of Wonders by Geraldine Brooks, and Marissa has a copy as well, so we're hoping to buddy read this at some point. This is a tale of plague. It's about when the plague comes to London in 1666 and how it affects a variety of people. It does sound really good. I might want to wait on this for a while until the current pandemic is a little further behind us, but it does sound really good, and I did enjoy People of the Book, so I know when I get to this, I will probably enjoy it. I was also really excited to find a copy of Half Sick of Shadows by Laura Sebastian, which is a retelling of part of the Arthurian legends. I believe it retells the Lady of Shalott from her perspective, with a lot more backstory and giving her a lot more power over her own story. And that sounds fantastic. Although I realized in trying to explain this to my friend, I haven't actually read The Lady of Shalott. Anything I know about The Lady of Shalott comes from Anne of Green Gables. So I really need to read that poem before I get to this. But Celtic and Arthurian fantasy is my favorite kind of fantasy, so I'm really, really hopeful that I will love this one. Marissa also recommended that I pick up Ex Libris, Confessions of a Common Reader by Anne Fadiman, I think, which is a collection of essays that Anne wrote about being a reader and all of the connections that she has formed with a variety of books throughout her life. And that sounds delightful. It looks delightful. I cannot wait to read this, and I'm sure I will really love it as someone else who just adores books. I also found a copy of book 4 in the Barsetshire series, which is Framley Parsonage by Anthony Trollope. No, I have not read book 3 yet, but I do own it, as well as book 5, so I am very relieved to have the book in between for when I finally continue with that series. I also found a copy of Wondersmith, The Calling of Morrigan Crow by Jessica Townsend. I have heard wonderful things about this series. It is a middle grade series about a young woman named Morrigan Crow who thinks she is cursed until on her 11th birthday a man called Jupiter North shows up and whisks her off to a magical school where she must train to join in some sort of magical competition. I have heard wonderful things from the people who have read this series, and it sounds like a fun bit of escapism, and I'm excited to try it. I also found An Unnecessary Woman by Rabih Alamedine, who is an author from Lebanon, who I have been meaning to read for years. I have his other book, The Hakawati, on my TBR. It's shown up on a couple monthly TBRs, but it is also huge. And I feel like I need to have read The Arabian Nights before I read it, so I never get around to it. This one I might get around to sooner, and I believe it looks at modern Arab culture and about a woman who has remained unmarried, who is very highly educated, and how society kind of pushes her to the fringes, and how she deals with that. It sounds really fascinating, and I'm really excited to have another of his books waiting for me. I also found a copy of Sepulcher by Kate Moss, which I'm not sure if it's a sequel to Labyrinth or if it just happened to be written after she wrote Labyrinth. Labyrinth has been on my TBR for absolute years, but I did love Kate Moss's book. Oh, what was the one about the cathedral? The Burning Chambers. And I also loved her when she appeared on the Intelligence Squared debate in defense of Emily Bronte. This one I heard about on a podcast from the Metropolitan Opera because I believe, yes, it takes place in 1891 in France, and Claude Debussy shows up as a rather main character. That sounds fantastic. And if you want to listen to that episode of the podcast, it is, I will try and link it down below, but it is the episode where Kate Moss is brought in as one of the experts to talk about why she loves Pelléas et Mélisande. Oh my gosh, it's not from the Metropolitan Opera, it's from Glyndebourne. But still, she talks about Debussy's opera Pelléas et Mélisande, which I am desperate to see. I also found book 1 in the Kristin Lavransdatter series, which is The Wreath. This is a Norwegian classic. I believe it was written in the 1920s, but it takes place in the 1400s. And they are by Sigrid Undset, I think. And I believe all of the books follow Kristin as she grows up and the trials that she faces in every stage of her life. I have not read anything from Norway. I know nothing about Norwegian history, so I am really excited to finally start this series in a much more manageable size than it would be getting the entire collection of all 4 books in a bind-up, which is how I've seen them typically. I also found this book, which is called Russian Gypsy Tales. I know we don't use the word gypsy anymore, but this is how it comes published. It was published before we collectively came to that realization. But these are stories that on the back say they come from all over Russia, from Siberia, from Smolensk, from closer towards the cities. And I'm really excited to read these, number 1, just to have a better sense of various cultural folktales, and number 2, to see how each of the stories compares, because as the back points out, depending on where these people settled in Russia, culturally they're going to be very different from one another. So I'm wondering if that's going to be reflected in the stories themselves. I then found this wonderful translation of the Ramayana by Ramesh Menon, and I am thrilled to read this. You may remember last month I read an arc of Kaikeyi, which is a retelling of the Ramayana from the perspective of the woman who is usually cast as the villainous stepmother. So that made me want to read the original because I know next to nothing about Hindu mythology. I can name the 3 main gods, but beyond that, I know nothing about how their mythology works. So I'm really excited to read this. It looks like a very readable translation. So I'm very excited to add this to my World Religions nonfiction section. I also found The Queen and I by Sue Townsend. Sue Townsend wrote the Adrian Mole series way back when. And this is a book I have been looking out for about 10 years now, and I'm so pleased I found a copy. This is a comedic look at society if Britain got rid of the royal family and the royal family now had to live in council flats, and if Buckingham Palace was now opened up to the public, having been divided into flats. And it's about how I believe all of those people involved find life very confusing after that switch up. And she is a very funny writer, so I can't wait to see what this turns out to be. I also found another of the Rebecca books from American Girl. Rebecca was not a doll I ever owned or looked at owning because I was a little bit too old by the time they brought her out, but I have a feeling I would have loved her when I was younger, so I'm always trying to collect all of her books anytime I go to a book sale. So this is book 2, it looks like. I think I have book 1 and possibly book 4 already. Once I have the whole collection, I will sit down and read all of them through. But Rebecca is a young Jewish girl who lives in New York City in the early 1900s. Yes, 1914. Which is a time period I have loved ever since I read the Dear Americas about Zipporah Feldman or the All of a Kind family books, so I'm really pleased to have another one of these to add to my collection. This book I picked up just because of the title. It's called Vivaldi, of course. Provocative and challenging quizzes for overeducated, really smart people who have nothing better to do. How could I resist? Honestly, that was all I needed to know. I have no idea what the quizzes actually look like, but I want it just for the title. But if you are interested, it is written by Danny Gurr. And the final book I got from that book sale was The Flanders Panel, also by Arturo Pérez Reverte. This is a standalone novel, I believe. A novel of suspense, as it says down here. And it is about an art expert who is restoring this particular painting when she discovers a hidden inscription in Latin, which translates to "Who killed the knight?" And she goes off to try and discover what this means, and as this puzzle unravels further and further, she is drawn further and further into danger. And that sounds amazing, and I'm really excited to read something else by Pérez Reverte. And then finally, I have a couple more books because the school finally finished weeding the school library, so I picked up a couple more. The first is this beautiful, untouched edition of Rob Roy by Sir Walter Scott. So I will be getting rid of my old, battered movie cover copy and keeping this one instead. This is a novel about the Highland outlaw Rob Roy in Scotland in the early 1700s, I believe, as written by Sir Walter Scott in the early 1800s. Supposedly, my family is descended from the McGregors, of whom Rob Roy was one. We have found no genealogical evidence for this, but it made my great-grandmother happy to think it anyway, so I'm especially excited to get to this at some point. They were also giving away The Salmon of Doubt, which is a collection of unrelated writings, I believe, by Douglas Adams, who wrote The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, which I adore. So I'm very excited to get to these. They were also giving away a copy of Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe, which every high schooler seems to read these days except for me. So I will remedy that 15 years later. And finally, read it. I know this is a South African classic or modern classic. Beyond that, I don't know much, but honestly, I think that's kind of good. They were also giving away a copy of The Stories of Eva Luna by Isabel Allende, and I have never read anything by Isabel Allende either, so what a perfect opportunity. Again, I know nothing about the plot of this. Is it a full novel? Is it short stories? I'll find out. And they were also giving away In the Time of the Butterflies by Julia Alvarez, which is another classic that people tend to read in English class or in Spanish class. and I never did in either class, so hoping to remedy that. And then finally we went back into New York City. Miraculously, I did not buy any books when I went to the opera, but we went back a final time to see Hadestown for a second time, which was so perfect and so wonderful. If you get a chance to see it in New York or any of the touring companies, do it. It is just beautiful and powerful and perfection. But while we were there, we stopped by a Barnes & Noble, and I picked up 3 books there. One was The Deep by Rivers Solomon, which has been calling to me for ages, and I love the new cover, so I thought, why not? This is a book about the descendants of slave women who were thrown off of slave ships while they were pregnant, and posits that those descendants became mer people and formed this underwater community. And that sounds amazing. I also picked up The Siren of Sussex by Mimi Matthews, which is another Victorian historical romance, or if not Victorian, at least 19th century historical romance. It sounds wonderful. It has gotten rave reviews, and I need something to fill the Evie Dunmore-shaped hole in my life while I wait for book 4. They also had Yours Cheerfully available for 50% off, so I grabbed it. That is the sequel to Dear Mrs. Bird, and both are by A.J. Pierce. And I really loved Dear Mrs. Bird, so I'm excited to revisit those characters in the sequel. And then we also visited the Drama Bookshop, which is now owned by Lin-Manuel Miranda, which was very exciting. He purchased it so that it would continue to be open, not only to sell all kinds of books about plays and theater and acting and writing, but also to be a place where actors and writers and composers could gather to create more fabulous theater for us in the future. And I also bought 3 books there. The first was a collection of Noel Coward plays. I have been looking for this exact collection for a very long time. In this collection are Private Lives, Blithe Spirit, and Hay Fever. I have seen Private Lives and I love it. I have been meaning to see Blithe Spirit. The film looks incredible. And I've been meaning to see Hay Fever for ages, ever since I saw Maggie Smith in a clip of it from the National Theatre in the 60s. So I am thrilled to be able to read all of those now. They also had a copy of Present Laughter, which I love. I saw Andrew Scott do this from the National Theatre right before the pandemic. It was right before Christmas of 2019. And it was perfection. I have never laughed so much. So I'm really thrilled to have the original script. And then finally, a complete surprise was finding a copy of The Mirror and the Light, the play, by Hilary Mantel and Ben Miles. I had not even realized that they had adapted that final novel for a play. I had hoped that they would, since Wolf Hall and Bring Up the Bodies were fantastic plays. So I am thrilled to at least have this written version to read through. I am hoping that it comes to New York sometime in the near future, like the other 2 did. I know it closed early in London because of Omicron issues, but I'm hoping it comes to New York so that I can see it as well, because those actors are incredible. Ben Miles and Nathaniel Parker do a fabulous, fabulous job. And I'm thrilled that Ben Miles had input on the script, since he has spent so long with Cromwell. I think that's pretty incredible. And I think I like him even better as Cromwell than I do Mark Rylance. I think they both bring interesting parts of his character to the table, but I think Ben Miles is closer to how Hilary Mantel saw Cromwell. So there we are, 40 minutes later. Those are all of the books that I have acquired this spring. Let me know in the comments down below what you think about any of these. Are you curious about any of them? Do you have other recommendations for me? The only caution I have for you is don't tell me if you didn't love any of these books, because I'm still excited for them. Once I've read them, then please tell me your thoughts. Until next time, be safe, be well, and happy reading. Bye everyone.